For 25 years, the wealthiest families in the city paid me a handful of cash every Friday to scrub their marble floors and dust their chandeliers, never realizing that the quiet woman cleaning their mansions was secretly buying up the very companies that built their fortunes, and by the time they figured out who I really was, I didn't just work for them, I owned them. Before we open this private ledger and reveal exactly how I built an invisible financial empire from a minimum wage paycheck, take a moment to tell me in the comments below which country you are watching from tonight. The truth is, wealth is rarely built under flashing lights. It is built in the shadows, through relentless, almost obsessive consistency. Every single time those wealthy families handed me my meager weekly pay, I didn't see tiny bills. I saw seeds. While they spent thousands on depreciating luxury cars and designer clothes to look rich, I lived in a tiny, drafty apartment and immediately funneled 30% of everything I made into a rigid, emotionless dividend reinvestment strategy. I started with fractional shares, ignoring the noise of the stock market and simply buying small pieces of the massive consumer companies my wealthy employers relied on every single day. When the market crashed and everyone panicked, I didn't sell a single share. Instead, I took extra cleaning shifts and bought twice as much while the prices were at rock bottom. The magic of compound interest is that it starts as a whisper before it becomes a roar, and after a decade of silently reinvesting every single dividend payout, my small portfolio began generating more cash on its own than I was making scrubbing floors. But nobody knew. To the outside world, I was just a ghost, pushing a mop invisible and ignored, until the morning a catastrophic economic crisis hit, wiping out the flashy, over-leveraged portfolios of the very people I worked for. As they desperately began liquidating their prized assets to avoid complete bankruptcy, they had no idea that the anonymous corporate buyer quietly acquiring their debt and their real estate at pennies on the dollar was the exact same woman who was currently emptying their trash cans, and I was just one signature away from pulling the trigger on a deal that would leave my arrogant employers working for me. The pen hovered over the contract that would officially transfer the Harrison family's entire estate into my holding company. But before the ink could touch the paper, my burner phone vibrated with a text message that made my blood run cold. It was from Arthur Harrison himself, containing just 2 words and an attachment reading, "I know," followed by a screenshot of my earliest brokerage statements from 20 years ago. The meticulous wall of anonymity I had spent decades building had been breached by a forensic accountant Arthur hired in a desperate bid to find out who was buying his debt, and instead of finding a ruthless Wall Street hedge fund, he found his Maid. Arthur immediately threatened to invoke an obscure and highly illegal clause in my old employment contract, claiming that any wealth generated while living in his staff quarters rightfully belonged to his estate, attempting to seize my entire life's work in a single malicious lawsuit. If you are captivated by the hidden psychology of money and the untold stories of how wealth is truly built, make sure you subscribe to the Night Library archives right now so you never miss a case file. I was standing in the very kitchen I had scrubbed for 2 decades, realizing that my relentless strategy of compound interest and dividend reinvestment was about to be weaponized against me by a man who had never worked a hard day in his life. He demanded a meeting in his downtown corporate boardroom the next morning, giving me exactly 12 hours to sign over my portfolio to him or face a brutal legal war that would freeze my assets and expose my identity to the world. I walked into that glass-walled office wearing the exact same faded gray uniform I always wore to clean his house, clutching a single manila folder. But what Arthur didn't realize as he sat there with a smug grin and an army of expensive lawyers was that I hadn't just been buying his real estate, I had been buying his corporate debt too, and I was about to drop a financial bomb on that mahogany table that he never saw coming. I slid the single manila folder across the mahogany table and watched Arthur's smug grin vanish, the moment his expensive lawyers read the page inside. It was not a surrender of my holding company or my portfolio. It was a formal notice of immediate default. Over the past decade, while Arthur was taking out massive loans to build his over-leveraged portfolios, I had been quietly purchasing his corporate debt. By threatening to seize my life's work with a malicious lawsuit, he had unknowingly triggered the penalty clauses in his own debt agreements, giving me the legal right to instantly call in the entire balance, which he absolutely could not pay. His attorneys went pale and whispered the devastating truth to him that if he proceeded with his legal war, I would immediately bankrupt his entire empire and legally seize the Harrison family's entire estate. Without saying another word, Arthur signed the settlement, protecting my anonymity, and walked out of his own boardroom, leaving the woman who used to clean his floors as the new owner of his legacy. The true moral lesson of this case file is that wealth is never about how much money you spend to look rich to the outside world, but about the silent, emotionless discipline of acquiring assets that produce cash flow while everyone else is accumulating liabilities. Relentless, almost obsessive consistency will always defeat arrogance and dangerous leverage. If you want to see how another unseen investor used these exact principles to completely corner a global market, click the next case file on your screen right now and let the archive continue.